I'm going to call the meeting back to order. And board members are most certainly welcome to eat their lunch while we're continuing. Under discussion, we have Strategic Planning Committee update. Oh, Gord. David, are you still on the line? Perhaps not.
I am.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Just making sure.
Might want to move on to the next one.
Okay, yeah, why don't we do that? We'll just move on to the next item. Actually, I'll save assessment for everybody to be in here too. Let's go on to the advanced placement report. You have a copy of the report. Does anybody have any questions regarding it? It's pretty straightforward. Seeing no questions. Science standards. Jeremy Eltz from the department. I'm not sure, yeah, you met Jeremy just a little while ago when we started this process.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to come and speak about the science standards process. I just wanted to give you a brief update about this process. I think I have a PowerPoint that can be brought up. No? All right. Well, we'll just continue on, and I can go over what was going to be in the PowerPoint, and if you have any questions, I can.
Well, let's see if we can get it up. Surely they have it.
Okay. Well, that'll allow some of the state board members to return.
Sure.
Anyways.
You have what? You don't have the slides? Okay. Go ahead and proceed. You all have a copy? Okay.
All right,
Go
great,
ahead, Jeremy.
Great. So I just wanted to give an update about what was going on with the science standards revision. We actually just completed the first round of revisions, and we posted them for public comment, so they'll be open until August 21st. Since we had some new state board members, I just wanted to go over a little bit of the background and some of the goals. These aren't a complete overhaul of the science standards. It's really just updating the current research, taking a look at some of the national research. I have indicated on the slide, Project 2061, the National Science Education Standards. Obviously, the next generation science standards we're taking a look at. I believe Mr. Hendry sent around something from the National Association for State Boards on Education, which was actually a great resource, so I was able to take a look at that. But like I said, it wasn't a complete overhaul. One of the things that we were focused on was kind of paring down two essential knowledge so that we're not teaching such a wide breadth of science, but actually the necessary things to allow our students to be successful in post-secondary education or post-secondary life, really. So the big thing, though, is we will be including computer science K-8. And personally, I think that's a big game changer for Indiana, is adding computer science. A lot of the STEM jobs of the future are going to require, basic literacy in computer science. I do want to make a point, though, that this is not, it's not like career and tech ed computer science. The K-8 is just to build a foundation of necessary computer science skills that students should have. And please, if you have questions, just chime in. What we've done so far, we've analyzed the next generation science standards. We crosswalked those actually to see, how do they compare with our 2010 standards? Do we want to use anything from the next generation science standards? I think it would be very irresponsible to not look at those. Those were, they did a really good process to create those standards. We also reviewed the adoption in other states to see what other states were up to, whether they were going to use the next-gen science standards, create their own, make a hybrid of them, or whatnot. We've defined review groups and the management structure. We did online applications for volunteers. And then we've done online review of the science standards. So everything's been done online to this point. Teachers were able to receive professional growth points for participating in the science standards review so far. I'm still open. We will have multiple rounds of review. So if you know teachers or you yourself want to participate in the review process, by all means, let me know. I really would lean on you to advocate for teachers in your area to participate. Most teachers, I think, feel this is a very fruitful professional development opportunity. It allows them to go deeper into the standards and really understand why this process goes about. And they do understand that it's not coming from government or state. It's actually coming from the teachers and professors in our state. I didn't actually lead any of the review groups. I kind of just managed it and kept the process going. I left it up to the experts to actually do these standards. So we did finish the first round of revisions, and they are posted for public comment until August 21st. So again, if you can get those out through all the networks you can, or you yourself want to review the standards, I would love it. I'd love to get the feedback. Again, our timeline, we're hoping to have the second round of public comment or a second round of revision after we receive feedback from the state of Indiana in September. And then we'll do a second round of public comment after that. So I just want to make the point that this is a multiple round. We only finished the first round. The standards are fairly rough, I would say. It's a rough draft at this point. And November, December, we'll look at a final round of revision. And as part of that, that'll include a college and career ready committee to take a look at the standards and make sure that the standards in science K-12 would prepare a student for next level success. And then we'll have a group of teachers and educators looking at resource determination and development. So we want to make sure if we're going to roll these standards out in the 2016-17 school year possibly, that there are resources available to the teachers to help them actually address the standards, especially with computer science, because we know that that's going to be a hurdle. I wasn't taught in computer science, so it would be a hurdle for me, so I would like to have resources available to actually address those standards. Between January and March, I'd like to bring it back to the state board for your review and adoption. It's really just a goal by early 2016, within those first few months, that we can start preparing for implementation. For our reviewers, we had over 150 reviewers from all over the state, from all variety of schools, public, charter, private, homeschool. Every grade level is represented, every content is represented, every region of the state is represented. Teachers, administrators, professors mostly, and then a few from industry. We did have a couple from industry in this part. And as we move forward in the process, we'll gradually increase the industry representatives in that process until we get to the College and Career Ready Committee. Or, there's no way, we wouldn't stop anybody from participating in this process as well. Almost 20 doctorates or PhDs participated in this, so we had a very well-educated group. And you can see in the slides the representation from higher education. So we had a broad base of support from higher ed. I give you a kindergarten revision example so you can kind of get an idea of what actually happened. Like I said, this was all done online. We used Google Documents so that reviewers could actually go in and put their feedback in an Excel spreadsheet. So I give you a kindergarten example here. And I just wanted to give this example because it's indicative of how we went through this process. You could see some of the real reviewer comments. So this is actual comments from reviewers. And then on the next slide of the kindergarten revision example, it actually shows you the revised standard. And I make the point here that the next generation science standards are included in this so that the teachers could look at it, see, is it better than what we have? If it is, we can use pieces of it, parts of it. If it's not, we don't need to use it. It wasn't imperative that we actually keep the next generation science standards. But like I said, we wanted to look at them. So you can take a look at that and see what we actually did there with and we did this K to high school content areas. And then computer science, K to 3, I give this example because I wanted to give you an idea of what computer science actually looked like in the elementary or middle school grade levels. It's not coding, it's not the O's and 1s or things like that. It's actually just making sure that the students are literate with technology and computers. And getting to the point that they might be able to program an app or create, basic computer games, things like that. Eventually, they'll get there. So we do have, these were drawn from the Computer Science Teachers Association. We had approval from their president to actually use them, revise them however we would like to include them in our standards. We really think this is an important step for Indiana to add computer science K-8. And then finally, please consider review. This is the website that's set up. The link, any media here, please send it out to everybody that you can, and get everybody in Indiana to participate. That's all I have. Any questions, concerns?
And did they have the documents about some of the key changes?
Yes, everybody should have the documents with the actual revised standards, some of the key changes from grade level to grade level. Not too much in elementary school. There were a few high school content areas where there were some big changes, biology, so I created a crosswalk for biology to kind of show you the changes there. I wouldn't say there was drastic changes with biology, but there were some condensing. So instead of having separate standards, so instead of having 8 standards, I think we have 5 now. But it was really just condensed into 5. I don't think we really lost too much from that.
Since we have a biology assessment, I wanted to make sure that you saw the biology piece side by side. When Jeremy brought these to me initially, he had prepared a similar document, and I said I thought that would be most helpful for you as the board members to review. So he did a good job of talking about where the changes are, and you'll notice even some in the elementary, they might have shifted a grade level or something like that in addition. So thank you, Jeremy, for your work. Any comments for Jeremy right now? It's just the beginning of the process.
I'll be at Mother Bear's for lunch if you have questions.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jeremy. Thank you. All right, let's backtrack. A strategic planning committee update.
Yeah, we just have a few updates for the board, and I'm happy to provide further detail. But we, as everyone knows, we have received feedback from over 6,000 educators over the past 7 months to identify areas of need for educator evaluation to improve our education evaluation system. And in February of 2015, TNTP made recommendations to the State Board of Education to improve Indiana's educator evaluation system. At the time, we also engaged at the last board meeting INTAS, the INTAS project at Indiana University, to have a work scope and contract to support the State Board of Education and the Indiana Department of Education in implementing some of the TNTB recommendations and conducting necessary research on Indiana's evaluation system. So we heard an update from Drs. Cole and Murphy, who are working closely with our staff, Ashley Calger and Sarah Pease from the department, on a go-forward plan for the scope for INTAS. And it's just a very exciting project that will be going on over the course of the next couple years to look at improving educator evaluation in the state of Indiana. Secondly, we heard from the department as to its plan for ensuring equitable access to excellent educators in Indiana. This is a plan that was set forth or required by the U.S. Department of Education, and the goal is to ensure that kids that are in poor, high poverty, high minority districts also have access to highly effective educators. And the department has put together a 2015 plan update, which I assume is on the website.
It is.
Great. So I would encourage folks out there listening to take a look at it. I think it's really exciting that we're focusing on this very important issue, and we're working together in a very collaborative way to do that. So thank you, Superintendent, for your staff's hard work on this. So with that, we will continue the important work of the Strategic Planning Committee and would welcome anyone to ask any questions.
And I would add that the U.S. Department of Education is so excited about Indiana's equity plan, educator effectiveness equity plan, that they've asked us to speak at their national conference that they had just recently. And I think, I'm not mistaken, they're going to be at a national school board, State Board of Education meeting too. So I know they have another meeting coming up that the U.S. Department has asked them to present. So we're doing great things, making sure that we have quality teachers,
Absolutely.
in
and
all
we're
of our
really-
schools.
And we're really just trying to drill down on how we can provide better access to great teachers in these schools. So it's really, really important work. The data that we're trying to acquire, the department's looking into, is going to really help us make better decisions here at the state board.
Thank you. Now we're back to assessment. Michelle? Oh, Danielle?
If you don't mind, since this was labeled Assessment and Accountability Update,
Sure.
I would like to introduce our new Director of Accountability. It's Maggie Pano. It was mentioned earlier that she's the new director, and I believe you've asked for every month for there to be a maintained agenda item of an Assessment and Accountability Update. So I know you know Dr. Walker well, and I wanted to introduce Maggie and let her say a few words about her new role and her new team.
Thank you, Maggie.
Hi, thank you. As Danielle said, my name is Maggie Pano. I've been with the department for a little over 3 years now, in the role of a staff attorney. In my role as a staff attorney, I worked very intimately with school accountability and Debbie Daly over the past 2 years, and have been heavily involved in the A through F appeals, as well as the recent A through F rulemaking. Worked very closely with Cynthia and Brian and John, so I look forward to continue the working relationship with them. I'm really excited. We have 3 new additional team members on our accountability division, including Brenda Earps, who is our assistant director, Jeff Milkey, who is our data modeling and analyst coordinator, and James Rodman, who is our accountability data analyst. So we're really excited. All 3 have worked with A through F from the technical IT perspective. So they are great additions to the team, and we're really excited moving forward.
And in addition to that, I know we have some contracted services as well that assist in that process, so.
Correct, yep. Molly Chamberlain, who used to work at the department and also assisted the state board. We have her on contract to work as a consultant with us as well. So we're really excited about moving forward, and please feel free to call me or email me. I'm available anytime. So yeah, I actually am very excited to be back here. I went to undergrad and law school here, and I'm actually a graduate of Northwest Allen County Schools. So, so go Chargers!
All
Oh
right.
gosh, I'm really excited about my alumni.
Thank you, Maggie.
So yep, I'll Michelle.
All right, Michelle. And Michelle, I appreciate that you always bring things in writing so that we can review them later. And if we've got any questions, we can always get back to you. You are a 24/7 person, I know, and I greatly appreciate that.
You're welcome, Superintendent Ritz. I think it's a little bit easier sometimes to have that later to remember what we've talked about as a group. So certainly this is not any different information if I weren't having some notes, but I just seem to find them helpful for you, especially if you are communicating back at the ranch with your school or your corporation or other educators across the state. Hopefully you'll find it helpful.
And before we begin, I think you're sending out a special
I am. Don't steal my thunder. That's on my
DOE
list.
update this week.
That's the problem with going next to the bottom of the list. Save the best for last, maybe.
Yeah.
I have all these little advertisements for things to come in my update. Well, I had 4 topics I wanted to speak with you about this afternoon. And the first one really we've covered pretty much obviously with Ellen Haley being here to address you. Just kind of wanted to give you a quick overview that really what we're doing this week in our work with CTB is finalizing those scoring parameters, making sure that any item responses that we think deserve points for the student, that we're giving them those points. And certainly then the next step in our process is to host our cut score setting, which again, you're all invited. And I'll make sure Cynthia has the details on any new dates and location, and she can put that in your board update so that you can know about it. And you're always welcome. We would love to have you. I think the timeline revisions, Mr. Hendry asked about that question. Appreciated that. I'll be working really closely with Maggie Payno that you just met and making sure that we have a timeline that we can share with you as soon as possible. Any questions before I leave that topic and go on to the next one? Okay. So I wanted to give you an update on the formative assessment, and we're very excited because we are about to roll out the formative assessment, what we're calling request to participate, because it's really not an application, if you will. It's grant money, so schools don't have to apply really for the grant. The grant monies are available per the formula that you actually discussed and approved, and then we sent that, you might remember, to the state budget agency, and they approved the formula, so we'll have a request to participate. And per your request, we have done a lot of work with the IT team at the department and made sure it was as streamlined as it could be. Almost everything that they will actually enter, if you will, I use that in quotes almost, is pre-populated. And that's, I think, was a request of the board, making sure that the form, and Superintendent Ritz, we've actually shown her some screenshots and did a demo for her to make sure that we're meeting the expectations that the board had about ease of use, again, streamlined and making it as condensed as possible, but getting the information that we need. We did want to give schools a 30-day window to actually request to participate, so we will open that in the middle of August and close that in the middle of September. Certainly, schools can fill out the, again, request to participate as soon as they want to or as late. We have built it. Another one of your requests was that the corporation person could actually enter the information on behalf of schools. So it can be entered either by a school staff member or by the corporation. So again, giving that flexibility. One of the things that we've been planning, and we're actually in the process of creating, is a WebEx to make sure that we explain about the process and about the grant, and also giving them directions. The form is very intuitive, so I'm feeling very good about ease of use, but we want to make sure we have kind of a step one, do this, step two, do this, for those folks that are linear and need that little extra. And also a set of FAQs is extremely important in this process because we're changing the way that we've done the formative assessment for the last 7 years to a very different process, but giving lots of opportunity for choice locally in decision-making about the tools that will be used. So we want to have a very robust FAQ, and we have a great start on that, and we're close to finalizing. The other thing that we wanted to do, and we've talked about the board with about this topic, is make sure that we could actually enter into any master contract agreements on behalf of schools to save each individual school or school corporation from having to enter into an agreement if they didn't want to go through that process. It's very laborious, really, for a local school or school corporation. So we're actually meeting with vendors next Tuesday afternoon to describe really what the expectations are based on the formative assessment grant, and if they want to be a state provider, here's the process we're going to use, and on behalf of the schools, we'll enter into an agreement with those vendors. So we've certainly invited any vendor that was part of the RFP process that's met the criteria. And we also, you may or may not remember us talking about this in July, but we had a survey where we asked folks in the field to just give us more feedback on other vendors they were interested in possibly using. And so we're vetting those right now so that we can make sure they meet the criteria that's been approved by the board to see if we can add them to the list. So we've been busy little beavers, so to speak,
Superintendent,
making sure that we get all of these things in order.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Steve.
Thank
sorry,
you for
Dr.
doing
Yeager.
that. That's very important, and it will take a load off of local
Yes.
school districts, and very, very helpful. Thank you.
There's actually, oh, you're quite welcome. There's actually a place in the request to participate where they can indicate whether they want the state to enter into a contract or on their behalf, or if they want to do their own locally. So again, we're trying to make the request to participate a one-stop shop so that we don't have to collect any more information unless it's absolutely necessary beyond that. So we're trying to fit everything in there that we need.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes, go ahead, Leanne.
Questions, if you don't mind. With your FAQ that you create, I've had people ask, based on the information that you gave about formative assessments on the website, you gave examples. So one example was selecting assessment that had a beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. And so I think there may be some confusion that folks in the field believe they have to have all three. So in the FAQs, just
Yes,
making
that is
clear.
actually one that's in there already.
Perfect.
We have a staff member that's point person on
Great.
this. Shalonda Trice is working on the FAQ.
And-
And she's very detail-oriented, so she's included that on her list.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then my other question, so there's going to be a 30-day window. When will districts be able to anticipate getting the thumbs up that you can go ahead and enter into these agreements?
Sure.
Because with the K through 2 piece, that adds a little bit of complexity.
And we did, I should mention this, and I think we talked about this maybe in July, we did include K2 in there to say, if you're interested and there are monies, which of the K2 tools would you like to use or not at all? So that, again, we wouldn't have to have a separate request. But back to your original question, really thinking about, I'm sorry, I forgot your question. Isn't
So
that
my
horrible?
question, so we have a 30-day window to
Okay,
submit the
sorry.
request.
I'm
When
sorry.
will we know that we can begin?
So schools can actually begin right away, and one of the things Superintendent Ritz started to talk about that I wanted to share is we actually are having a DOE dialogue dedicated to assessment this week that will go out later this week that explains, including that actually. We know that there are some schools, obviously, that have already started, and they really want to give their formative assessment maybe in the next few weeks, and we want them to be able to do that. Many of the schools will actually probably click the box that says we want to do a local contract and be reimbursed. If they've already entered into an agreement, for example, with a vendor, or they want to because they want to get a jump start, really, because the monies are coming in kind of funding streams on the back end, we don't want to prevent anyone from starting as soon as they want to. And that's actually part of what we're pushing out in the dialogue this week. That's an excellent
The actual
question.
application process, I believe August 14th will be the date that
Yeah,
we're
I think
shooting
Monday
for
is
to
the
have it out.
17th, yeah.
And
We'd
then,
like to
and
push
then we'll
the
put it in the
14th, but-
dialogue on the 17th.
So where we feel comfortable doing that with 3 through 10, we wouldn't feel comfortable doing that with K through 2 unless we knew for sure that those funds were going to be available.
Yes, and I think, several people have asked that very question. How will we know how much money we'll have for K2 and when will we know? And those are certainly fair questions. I think that's the challenge, is that those are then calculated once we get this information by the middle of September from all schools. So what we've actually been talking with folks about who have called or emailed our office is you're welcome to go ahead and enter into an agreement if you want to for K2, knowing that there's not a guarantee you'll get total reimbursement. We don't really know how much money you'll have, but if that's a tool you want to use and you're willing to provide the funding for it if you have to, then don't wait. But really just trying to give them some decision-making power at the local level. It is a good question. It's one that we're hopeful people will fill out the request as soon as possible, but we want to make sure we gave them a month to do so.
Any more questions regarding the formative assessment? All right, Michelle?
Okay. The third item on the list is kind of dovetailing into what I was just trying to speak about, and that is really having a dedicated DOE dialogue. And many of you probably know we have a corporation test coordinator in every corporation, non-public school, choice school, charter school. That's the main point of contact from our office that we contact with on a regular basis to give information. So we always provide, and we call that person a CTC for short. Sorry, another acronym. But certainly we want to make sure that the one point of contact in the local community, school community, has all the information they need. So a DOE dialogue would go out, and that would also go to a CTC, for example. And many, many more details actually are sent to a CTC about the implementation of assessment programs. But one of the things that we feel like there are many changes going on in our world of assessment, and we want to make sure that folks are paying attention to it and that it doesn't get lost in any of the other really important information in the DOE dialogue. So we're certainly pushing that out this week. And we'll make sure, obviously, I'll send that to Cynthia, and I know she'll want to send that to you all as well. Just giving some of the information I'm going to talk about next. So giving the field all the information they need to know about decisions you've made. For example, we've communicated there's no 9th grade test, but I think people still wonder about that. So just really trying to nail down all those details for them now that they're back from their summer break and making sure they have the information that they need. And one of the things that our partners in the College and Career Readiness Office at the DOE have been doing this summer is talking a lot about assessment while they've been circulating around the state, which has been really great. And we value them as partners. They work with us on many of our assessments. And I know the e-learning team has actually been talking about some of that as well. So that's been very helpful. One of the other things that I'm doing in the next couple of weeks is recording what I call just short WebEx recordings, or I'm really calling them information sessions, to give folks more details about the formative assessment piece, the grade 10 high school test now, so that folks, and we'll put those on the web actually, so even a parent or a high school student who wants to know more about their test can actually listen to that and get more information. Again, just a short bite of here's the information you need to know about this assessment, so that we're providing just really as many ways to communicate that as possible, asking other partners at the DOE to send out via curriculum listservs or other ways that we can communicate the information. I think we can't do that enough, so we're certainly planning to do that. And what I wanted to talk about next is actually a question that Ms. Kwiatkowski asked earlier in the day, and that's really thinking about the grade 10 assessment. And so if you look behind the front cover sheet of the packet I disseminated this afternoon, I want to give you just kind of a peek into what's happening in grade 10 assessment and give you kind of an overview and be sure to respond to questions that you might have. This bullseye is actually something that we have out on our web, and it's really designed to give the teacher a handle on instructional priorities. Assessment really should just be a reflection of instruction. And so the one thing we want to do is make sure we're not assessing low priority content. And this process, as you well know from having heard me speak before, involves educators. But this bullseye really seems to hit home for lots of educators. It's a visual that makes sense to them. And the icons that you see on this bullseye, the check plus in the middle, that represents critical content in that grade or course. The check is important, but it's obviously not as important as the critical. And then the check minus means it's additional content. Typically, the additional content is not on the test. And we actually have some verbiage that goes along with that. So I'm not going to go through every page, but if it's okay, I'd like to just highlight a few things that are in this part of the packet I disseminated to you. There are lots of questions about the math test, so I want to start with that one. That's the first part in the stapled area right below the bullseye there. And this, what you see first is the test blueprint. And the idea behind the blueprint really is to communicate kind of in a big picture sense for the teacher, the priorities. And if you look at this blueprint, you'll notice that the middle item, the reporting category called linear equations, inequalities, and functions, is actually the largest one. It's 28 to 38% of the test. And so what this does is this helps, again, the test needs to reflect instruction, and this blueprint is developed by educators that come to our committee meetings, and they help us prioritize the standards. So I just wanted to, again, kind of reflect that. This is based on what teachers who teach the course and work with the students have indicated. So a reporting category is sometimes made up of more than one standard, and that's why it's not called standards at the top of this page in this column. For English language arts, we actually call it strands because the reporting categories match the strands. And I hope I'm not getting into too much of the weeds here, but just to make that clear for you. So for example, in some grades, geometry and measurement are two different standards, but there aren't enough standards within each of those categories for them to stand alone for reporting of results. So they're combined together, and that's what makes a reporting category. So when we report out the results for students on this test, we'll have a geometry and measurement category. That's what that means. Teachers are interested in the blueprint because, again, it does give them an overview and helps them start to focus their instruction. What they really like is the next part, and you're smiling. I can tell you're one of those teachers, Ms. Wicker. So the next page is a narrative from me that basically explains what opportunity to learn is. And it's a legal requirement that we actually make sure that students have had an opportunity to learn the content for which we're going to be assessing them. And you can read this at your leisure or just briefly look it over, but you'll see in the middle of the page that check plus, check, and check minus to further delineate that. And notice right underneath that in the paragraph in bold where it describes the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students need by the end of that course, grade 10 in this case, to be on track to be college and career ready. And we talked about college and career ready when Cynthia and I were presenting about the cut score process, and really the focus on our college and career ready standards, and that the assessment is measuring our students' college and career ready. So this narrative is at the beginning of the chart that they really want to get their hands on, which are posted. These are all out on the web. And if you look at the next page, this is what the grade 10 math test is going to look like. So you'll see the reporting categories across the top. And then you see how important is the content to a student in grade 10 to demonstrate college and career readiness, on track college and career readiness, to be clear. I think sometimes the field gets a little confused, so it's always helpful for me to explain, I think, that at the end of grade 10, we don't expect them to graduate, but we want them to be on track to be ready for college and careers. So you'll see these icons next to the different standards. So we're being very transparent and saying these are the only standards that are on the assessment. And actually, many of these standards are extensions of the math they learned in grade 8. And since they'll be taking math in 9, but 9 is now starting into courses. You might remember us talking several months ago, actually, about, but what if we want to teach algebra, then geometry, then algebra, or algebra, algebra 2, geometry? And really, those decisions are made locally, and we want to make sure they stay that way, because really the test blueprint and this instructional guidance give them the information they need to be transparent about what's on the test. Again, by the end of grade 10, this is what every student should know and be able to do, regardless of the pathway that they take when they leave grade 10 to a different course. And you see an asterisk on some of these as well. And we have notes on the next page, which I won't go over right now. But what we try to do is actually delineate for teachers what will be on the first window, part 1, because that actually occurs in March. So that's before the end of the year. That answers the trimester question that people have. So if we're a trimester school, we're just starting to teach whatever course, they can be in any course. In March, when we give the first test, we'll actually have 4 math items. What are the content pieces for that? So that we can be transparent and teachers don't feel like, I have to teach everything on this list before March. So we really try to work with the field on that.
Michelle, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Did I hear you say these blueprints are on the web now?
Yes,
Okay, so
they are.
building level can
Yes.
access these? Okay.
And in the little vignette WebEx recordings I'm going to make, one of the things that our staff has done is kind of a walkthrough of our website of how to access these, because we want to make sure teachers are using them. And so I want to focus on that as well. But yes, these are all out on the web.
And then we're sending out a DOE dialogue that'll
Yes.
include all of this.
That's right. That's why it had to be its own,
Right,
because there's lots of
yes, it did.
information. Science is next, and I won't focus on as much detail now that you really have a handle on how these are developed. But science is a really important one to focus on with you for just a few moments, because you might remember that over a year ago, the board actually decided that biology is the right content, because every student takes biology in high school science, and that's the only course that is in common for every student. So that's really where the content piece came from. But also, and Jeremy actually talked about this, Jeremy Eltz, when he was at the podium this afternoon, about really thinking through other skills that are critical to scientific inquiry. The nature of science, science, engineering, and technology, things like that. And you'll see those delineated in the blueprint. So when you look at the blueprint, you'll see that more than half of the test is not biology content. It's actually focused on scientific inquiry and other skills that all students need, regardless of the content area. And then the other half of the test is focused on biology. This is, again, it's called our grade 10 test that meets our federal NCLB requirement. But if a student's in biology in any other grade level, that's when they would take this test based on opportunity to learn. So just wanted to be clear on that this afternoon. Again, you'll see the check plus, check minus, if you look through that document at your leisure. And the third and final one is the blueprint for English Language Arts. And these are strands, if you see on the left. And those are very, very familiar to grade 10 teachers. And then also the blueprint is there, as well as instructional assessment guidance. And this guidance is very similar to what our English 10 has been, because the standards in English are 9-10 standards and 11-12 standards. And so when we had an English 10 test right now, again, this is the last year for that, you might remember, for graduation for students, 10th graders are the last group. But certainly English is a much finer tuned, I guess I'd say, transition because the standards are not different. The standards in science and math aren't different, they're just arranged a little bit differently based on the content of the assessment. I'm going to take a breath.
Any questions
Any
regarding
questions about that?
what's going to go out to the field? Okay. Thank you,
And
Michelle.
the final item, you're quite welcome. The final item I had, Ms. O'Brien had a question about TAC and TAC. You might remember us talking a little bit about that at the July meeting. And so the last handout in your packet is just simply a description of what a technical advisory committee is versus a testing advisory committee. And certainly Cynthia did a great job of explaining really the role of the technical advisory committee in the example of a cut score setting. So this information is really just kind of an FYI for you based on her question, which I was glad to be able to share today. And at the bottom of this page is a list of each of the different standard settings and who the technical advisory members are. And certainly this last group for iStep will be reaching out to them, talking to them about the date change. But I know this is information that Cynthia thought you would find helpful to know who would be coming to the standard settings. And that's it for me today, unless you have any other questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, I think Dr. Bertram has a question.
Yes,
Oh,
Chair,
sorry,
if I
Vince.
may. Just a couple questions. When I think of college readiness and the matriculation of students into higher education, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year, or any other
career.
type of post-secondary experience, there seems to be a relatively easy way of determining alignment from a competency perspective when you get into mathematics, for instance. You know, what will students need to,
Sure.
how they
For the next
perform.
course,
That's
yeah.
correct. So, but when you get into college or career readiness, it seems to be a much more complex and challenging proposition. And as I work with hundreds of employers across the country and talk about what they look for in potential employees, I hear things like collaboration skills, communication, all the interpersonal pieces, critical thinking, problem-solving skills. And I'm just curious on how we're going to really determine career readiness outside of a couple of tested areas, and how will that help us determine that students are truly ready for careers?
And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this because I know you raised this also in July. And after our July meeting, there was actually an article about Greater Clark Community Schools and the things they were doing to measure those skills that you just described. And I thought of you instantly because it was things like collaboration and teamwork. Those are hard to measure on a standardized test, but they're very critical and need to be part of the curriculum as well. And so I think, one of the things as we think about as a board and we think about what our test looks like for NCLB requirements and being defensible, aligned to our standards, those are very critical skills that we need to make sure students have, but they're not part of our formal NCLB test. Doesn't make them any less important whatsoever. I think not only for careers, but for college, they need to be able to collaborate with other teammates or other class members on projects and things of that nature. So I think one of the things that is very helpful is say, yes, this is on the assessment, but this isn't the only thing that we want to make sure we're doing in our classrooms with regard to curriculum and learning experiences for students. So I thought Greater Clark was a perfect example of what you had described, and I know your Project Lead the Way program is really a model in terms of what that should look like across the country. And so I always appreciate you asking that question because I think the content knowledge is certainly maybe one bucket for college and careers, and we do put those two together because when students leave high school, they're really going to have need for much more sophisticated knowledge and skills than they might have 10 or 20 years ago and enter the workforce. And I think the Commission for Higher Ed, in working with DWD and the DOE on many of the things that we talk about together as we collaborate, really highlights that need. So I think again, I always appreciate the question, and I don't know that you're asking me to put questions on the test about that, but I think you're pointing out that we need to make sure we're paying attention.
No, I'm not asking you to add any
Right.
more questions to the test. But I am asking because our teachers and educators have an opportunity to evaluate student performance every day.
Right.
So when we think about formative assessment, summative assessment, the reality is, we're doing that as an accountability measure, but the real assessment is happening every day in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And
And the adjustments in instruction that are a result of that.
absolutely, and the intentionality around instruction and making sure that students are getting what they need.
Right.
But I'm also thinking, and this is really, from my perspective, a broader issue, but is there a more formal way for us to demonstrate students' career readiness? And I'm not in any way suggesting another test,
Right.
but through the normal process of what we're doing now, of being able to identify those behaviors, those skills, and to, in some way, credential those skills
Right.
in a way that adds value for students.
And really, this really kind of ties into Maggie Pino's world, if I could go into accountability for a moment, because one of the pieces of our accountability system that the board has adopted includes multiple measures, and we leave that open so that we can add other measures that the board might think are important, and that might be an example of one that should be in our future. If we could capture that measure of how ready are students for college and careers based on collaboration skills and the like, and could somehow capture that and include that in accountability, that would even elevate it more in terms of importance. So I think we're always wanting to think about those things, Superintendent Ritz, in terms
Yeah,
of the
but
future.
at a minimum, we definitely should be making sure it's infused in our curriculum.
Right.
So whether we choose to actually assess it at the end for accountability purposes, we certainly want to be assessing it and doing it within our classrooms all the time.
Yes, and I think from a standpoint of, again, credentialing it in some way so that there's true value for students. And we
Right.
can say, yes, you're college and career ready, but what does that really mean? And how have students demonstrated career readiness? And how do we help them from a value proposition? And I think, in higher education, when we're going into an admission process, there are certain metrics that we use to
Right.
determine admissibility for students, and employers are looking for the same thing.
Right.
And they're using various measures. And is there something we could do as a state that would add tremendous value for our students from a career perspective? So I'm looking at it as
Absolutely.
actually advancing our students and giving them a tool to use to have those kind of great career opportunities they want as a result of what's happening throughout
In
this
the
process.
classroom. That's
So
right.
that's really the basis. So the other question I have is really around, and it really goes back to Dr. Freitas' question earlier on about the length of the test. And I heard, Gordon mentioned the same thing, is that, and I made this comment in a previous board meeting as well around the number of testing windows and what we're doing. And, Superintendent made a point. The opportunity to streamline assessment is going to be very important for us.
Definitely.
And I wasn't necessarily referring to the students taking those tests, because they're different students, but there are tremendous resources allocated in schools to have
Right. For the
administering
implementation,
tests,
right.
to thinking about testing, and there are also tremendous resources necessary to actually administer the test from a technology perspective and what that does to an entire school setting. So if you take 29 weeks of and testing windows during a school year, and you have demands on computer labs and technology, everything else is
Yeah, it's impacted.
harmed by that
Yeah, it's
in
definitely
a
impacted.
significant way. So being able to streamline is very important, but then thinking about the length of the test.
Right.
And understanding that we're not in a position right now to say, here's how long it's going to be.
Right.
But I'd be really interested in hearing from Pearson what the estimated time, what are we really looking at? Is there a target? Are we just looking at the process then backing into, here's how long it's going to take? Or is there an opportunity to take a leadership position and say, we are not going to allow a test to extend beyond this? And so
Yeah, I think it's-
are they prepared
ahead.
to answer those type of questions for us?
I think they can't answer them today because our educators haven't made enough decisions for them to know the answer to that yet. But I think, as I shared in July, we actually are cutting back on the number of item types. So I don't know if you remember this, but just as a quick review, so we won't have extended response anymore, for example, for ELA in Part 1. And that takes a considerable amount of time off the test. That's at least 30 minutes for every student. And so maximizing the use of the passage we have, but not necessarily utilizing more writing opportunities when our writing prompt actually serves that purpose. We also are eliminating a reading passage and all the items that go with it in the Part 2 portion of the test. So we're looking at how do we still meet the blueprint, which we must defend to the U.S. Department of Ed, and we also are required to measure the full range of our standards as part of U.S. Ed requirement. And then also have these other competing priorities in terms of time. So we've been carefully looking at that and determining with teacher groups what can we actually eliminate, and then looking at maximizing the items we do use. To that very point, I think it's something we heard loud and clear last spring, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to efficiently but effectively measure student learning.
And we will be able to tell you the length of the test.
Yes, we will.
Even in sections.
Right now, we're in item development, and then
So-
once we start doing form selection, then we determine how many minutes do we need. And certainly, we want as few as possible, but making sure we give students ample time.
Carrie?
In bringing up Pearson, and I don't know, at what point does their contract start and they start coming in? You know, we had CTB in today. At what point does Pearson come in and we're able to say, okay, we don't have a fall pilot? Are you prepared not to have a fall pilot? Are you prepared to make sure this test works? And so at what point do they step up to the podium and we get to start asking them the questions? And
Sure.
and I'm sure they're looking forward to it.
I'm sure they are, actually. I mean, they're excited to be working with
I mean,
Indiana. I mean, Indiana
I'm
is
sure they
the
are. And
best
honestly,
state,
we
so-
are, and it'd be an honor.
That's right.
But, you know, at what point then do we get to say to them, you know, there isn't a fall pilot. Are you prepared for this spring to test
Right.
to cover everything so that we don't get back into
Right.
this again?
And I think those are excellent questions. And actually, when I mentioned the 77 educator committees, because we are doing our due diligence to make sure we're building appropriate assessments. So we're talking not just iStep, but also iStar. We need ECA to last us 4 more years, so we had to have some new items for that. And because we want to use matrix sampling, where each student is taking a handful of additional pilot items rather than a whole form duplicated over again as we had to do in spring of 15. I mean, I think all of those actually weigh into it, and that's part of what we're actually doing with Pearson right now is called our test design. And we have a call tomorrow, and maybe I already mentioned this or thought I dreamed it, but Cynthia's actually joining us tomorrow, and one of our TAC members, Dr. Carla Egan, to speak with the psychometricians at Pearson to talk about what should the grade 10 operational pilot look like? Do we have to do double items? Can we have some other way of being efficient but effective in making sure it's a defensible assessment? Piloting in the fall is not possible. The items aren't developed yet. So I think I can answer that question for Pearson. But I think in September, you'll really be focused on cut scores, but I think we should invite them to join us in October.
Sure.
I think then you can meet some of the Pearson key staff. I think it would be a great opportunity for you to speak with them directly, so we would be glad to invite them. Yes, thanks.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And our last item today is the Career Pathways Pilot Program. You received a memo on it. It's very short. So does anybody have any questions regarding that? Because it's not really developed. So, all right, seeing none. There are no more items on our agenda for us to address today. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for attending.